We started this last year. It's a multi-state project with two other states, Wisconsin and Minnesota. And I just want to say it's kind of been full circle for me because in the mid-1990s, I worked as part of the Minnesota County Biological Survey in Minnesota, and we were in a lot of peatlands up there. And fast forward now, and I'm back in peatlands again. So it's good to kind of be home in that sense. So I want to start a little bit about talking about what a peatland is. Peatlands, of course, are waterlogged accumulations of dead, partly decomposed vegetation, and they occur throughout the northern latitudes all the way to the equatorial tropics. So they have a broad distribution, and they could play a better role of protecting. If they were protected, they could play a better role in helping address climate change issues because these peatlands are a storehouse for carbon. And not only that, they are important for providing habitat for a lot of unique and rare species. And today I'm going to share some of those unique insect species that rely on peatlands in the state of Michigan. So in 2023, we submitted a multi-state SWIG project, State Wildlife Grant Project, with our heritage partners in Minnesota and Wisconsin, looking to assess the conservation status of several species of greatest conservation need. I think in the proposal, we had like 18 species that we were hoping to provide information on. And we were going to do this at both the regional and state levels. And our work plan had two objectives to the approach. One was to conduct a total of 150 peatland surveys across 3 states. And this was to gather baseline information or to provide information from sort of this point in time. We also, this basically included 25 surveys in Michigan in 2024. Our objective 2 was to gather habitat data at the same time while we were doing these surveys. For this study, we relied heavily on the MNFI biotics database, and we selected sites that were either element occurrence records or places on the landscape where we have found species of greatest conservation need targets, or where we had high quality natural community EOs for our peatland types. And in Michigan, the following 6 peatland natural community types were selected, including the bog and muskeg, which we typically think of as peatlands, but this also included places like northern fens, coastal fens, pattern fens, and poor fens as well. Northern fen, this is a S3 vulnerable community type. And when I give these S ranks, we think of S1 as the most critically imperiled. S2 is also imperiled. S3 would be classified as sort of vulnerable. S4 would be still rare, and S5 would be, throughout the state of Michigan, would be fairly secure. So I'll refer to these S ranks throughout the rest of this presentation. So what are northern fens? This is a great example of a northern fen in Mackinac County, just across the bridge. These are sedge and rush-dominated wetlands that occur on alkaline saturated peats and or marl, which is influenced by groundwater. The groundwater is also rich in calcium and magnesium carbonate. And these occur primarily where bedrock underlies a thin mantle of glacial drift on flat areas or shallow depressions. Also can be found in kettle depressions and on pitted outwash and moraines. So this is a good example. We see here that it's confined to sort of the northern half of the northern lower and also in the eastern half of the UP. Really neat habitats. Coastal fen is another unique habitat. It's an S2. I was lucky enough to be involved in a project a few years back with Brad Slaughter, who was a former botanist with us on staff here at MNFI. And we checked out a number of these sites across the northern lower and in the eastern half of the UP, including Drummond Island, and also on Marquette Island. These again are rush and sedge-dominated landscapes that are on calcareous substrates, and they're somewhat linked to are directly linked to Lake Huron and Lake Michigan, and they all occur again in the northern half of the northern lower and in the eastern UP. Oftentimes you can see in this picture, you can even see marl, these little marly flats, a lot of unique habitat. You can see all the pitcher plant in this particular photo. Pattern fens, now this is one of my favorites. This is a community type that is dominated, it's sort of a miniotrophic shrub, herb-dominated peatland mosaic, and you have a series, I don't know if you can see my cursor on here. Can you see the cursor? So what you have is groundwater that's flowing perpendicular to these ridges. And so you have these ridges, which are called strings, and then you have these low areas that are called flarks. The strings vary in height and width and spacing, but they're generally less than 1 meter tall. And sort of this whole landscape sort of has this wavy, ridge-like appearance. And oftentimes you can't see this when you're on the ground, but if you have a nice aerial photo, you can see this sort of characteristic patterning. Again, the flarks are saturated to inundated open lawns of sphagnum mosses, and also have sedges and rushes, while the strings are dominated by scattered stunted trees, shrubs, and sedges. Pattern fens occur in the eastern Upper Peninsula, and the highest occurrence is actually in Schoolcraft County in the UP. Poor fen is another wetland type that we were in surveying. These are also sedge dominated, found on very strongly to strongly acidic saturated peat. It's moderately influenced by groundwater, and this again occurs north of the detention zone and throughout the UP. Bogs. Now, this is what most people think of when you think of a peatland. They have little groundwater influence. The peat just sort of accumulates in contact with water, and it requires an abundant supply of water in order for these to occur. And so oftentimes you'll have these bog pools that are associated with bogs. And so they're fairly depauperate in the flora of these things, but they do have some unique species. And sometimes fire will occur naturally in drought periods, and this can alter the hydrology, mat surface, and flora. There's also disturbance by beavers can influence these as well, by flooding. This is a nice example of floating mat in Luce County. And finally, muskeg, which is a nutrient-poor peatland, which is characterized by acidic saturated peat and scattered or clumped conifer trees. Black spruce and tamarack are the two mainly. And these occur usually in large depressions on glacial outwash. And again, fires occur naturally during periods of drought. And you oftentimes will get these big mounds that are built up of accumulating peat that kind of stair-step their way up the surface of these plants, such as leatherleaf. And these habitats are really hard to get around in, even just walking through them. Imagining trying to chase a little butterfly through this is going to be somewhat difficult and proves challenging for sure. So if you want to get into a more detailed look at these natural communities, I recommend a field guide to the natural communities by our colleague of ours here, Cohen et al. In 2015. This publication is available on our website as well. This is a great resource. It provides information on the typical plants that are found in these, as well as some of the unique places where you can see these on the landscape. And so now I'm just going to take you through sort of the survey through the season. Target species were, when we first started doing surveys in the spring, from mid-May to the end of May. And these were focused on a few butterfly species. And what we did is we walked through these peatland habitats with aerial nets and close focusing binoculars. And when necessary, we would collect the individuals for ID purposes. Oftentimes we would catch it catch a butterfly, we would be able to take a photograph of it if we didn't know what it was and then release it. So we had minimal impact on taking these species. The first species I want to talk about is a little fritillary. It's known as the Frigga fritillary. It's a special concern species in the state. It has an S2 rank. Globally, it's fairly common because it occurs not only here, but over in Europe as well. Let's see, it's known from the Western UP, and we have 16 records in the database. The records extend from 1987 through 2009. So 2009 was the last confirmed record in our database. Now, that's not to say that other folks have seen them since then, which they have, but the last one in our database was 2009. It was not seen this past year after searching for it at 20 sites. And we're not sure what's going on with this species. We're going to need to do multiple years of survey effort to determine whether they're no longer found in the state or if they're just in low numbers. And with these spring butterflies, they have really brief periods of time when they're out and about. And this is a time of year, of course, that weather fluctuates wildly. And the flight range for this species can be anywhere from the first or second week in May through the first week in June. But when they're on the wing, they're only on the wing for about 5 to 10 days at maximum. So they have very brief time as an adult, and they do their thing, and then they're out to the next year. So it's kind of difficult to be in the UP during the right weather. So we're hoping that we just got bad weather and we were either early or late in the flight. So next year we'll hopefully know more information about that one. Another species that is S3 species and also on our special concern list is the Frigga fritillary. This occurs in the Western UP, and we have some records from the Eastern UP, but they have not been seen for a long time over there. It's been at least 30, 40 years or so since we've last seen them in the Eastern UP. We found Frigga at only 2 of 10 sites that we surveyed in 2024. And we also found them in really low numbers. So again, we're not sure what is going on with this particular species. And before I go too far, I want to go back to the Frigga fritillary. This particular species, the larvae feed on Salix pedicularis, which is bog willow, and they also may feed on bog birch, Betula pumila. So just wanted to highlight that. The Frigga fritillary, on the other hand, feeds on cranberry, wild cranberry species. So that's kind of interesting. A third early season butterfly that we surveyed for was the red disc alpine, which is, again, another one of our special concern species, and it currently is ranked as an S2 species. Good news here, we did find a new record for this in 2024. We only have a handful of records in the database now, and so this was a really exciting find. Dan Earl, our colleague here at MNFI, he's a research assistant with MNFI, and he was lucky enough to find this particular individual. And the larvae are believed to feed on grasses, so POA species, I think, is what they think they're feeding on. And again, this is another one of these real early mid-May flyers, and again, only on the wing for a few days at a time. So that's it for the butterflies. The next group that we looked at were dragonflies during the summer. We'll go through a couple of those species. So Heinz emerald dragonfly, this is one that's kind of near and dear to my heart. I was on the rare species recovery team for this with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. It's an S1 species, a G2 species, which gives it federal and state endangered status. It is a northern fen and coastal fen specialist, and it occurs in these little rivulets that go through fens or in seepage flows. And when the water is completely dry in the late fall, which typically happens, these larvae crawl down into crayfish burrows and they hang out there until the water comes back up. What's interesting is the crayfish are known to feed on these larvae as well when they're down there. And one of the interesting things that a researcher at University of South Dakota has determined that these larvae will actually roll themselves in feces of crayfish. And so the crayfish then will have a hard time detecting them when they're down in the burrows. Let's see. We have records for Oceana County in the northern Lower Peninsula, which is not showing up on this map as well, and also in Menominee County in the western UP. The next species is known as the incurvate emerald dragonfly. It is an S3 species and also a special concern species in the state. Only occurs in the UP currently. And this one is a little bit more widespread than Hines. This one is found throughout the UP in a variety of peatland habitat. We think it prefers poor fens and northern fens, but we have found this in a variety of wetland habitat types, including alder wetlands and also in northern wet meadows as well. This is an interesting species. What I liked about this photo on the left is you can actually see the critter, and you can see sort of, if you look through it, you can see sort of the habitat that occurs in the back behind. It is a northern fen species here in this particular photo. And this is a female here on the left, and on the right we have a male. And you can determine this particular species by the forceps-shaped terminal appendages on this particular individual. So continuing with the 2024 year surveys, late summer, this was a great time to be out, and we were looking for native bees and rare Paphiopema moths. This is one of the favorite times of the year and some of the favorite surveys that we did. And Logan, I don't know if you want to chime in here on the bumblebee surveys or the native bee surveys. If you want, you can talk. Otherwise, I'll just kind of cruise through this.
Well, I'm happy to if you, yeah. So most of the other species that we're surveying for have more particular habitat needs in bumblebees and native bees in general. Outside of, a few of the other native bee species, they're as a group, they're more generalist foragers, especially the bumblebees. In Michigan, we track 6 different species of bumblebees. And so part of this project is to gather occurrence data for our state-listed bumblebee species and baseline community data for the other native bees that can be found in these habitats. Throughout history, there hasn't been much survey effort for native bee communities in general in these northern peatland habitats, and so we're hoping to fill that gap by getting a better understanding of what species are there and if any of them are rare. And so a lot of the bee surveys that we're doing are sort of additional components that are added to our survey work for our primary targets.
Yeah, so there's 2 species that we were kind of interested in was the yellow-banded bumblebee, which again is the state-listed species. And then there's this other rare native bee that we know feeds on grass of Parnassus, which is a particular important, particular species that we find in these peatlands as well. So we're hoping to pick these up. We collected a number of bees this past summer, and they have been sent off to Minnesota for ID purposes. And so we don't really have any results, other than we did find one new location for the yellow-banded bumblebee this last year. And then Paphiopema alwini. This is an interesting species. Prior to 2009, it was known from 6 specimens in the world, right? So extremely, extremely rare. And they were found from 4 widely scattered locations in northern US and Canada. In Michigan, we knew it from a single specimen that was in a collection labeled 13th of August, 1925. And it was just labeled Beaver Island. So we don't know a whole lot about this particular species. We didn't know a whole lot about this particular species at the time. We had no idea what the larval host plant was even for this species. And so fast forward about 80 odd years later to 2009, there was a researcher named Kyle Johnson and a few other researchers that found a site in the Upper Peninsula from Luce County, Michigan. And in 2012, they went back and tried to determine what the larvae were feeding on. And they determined that it feeds on bog buckbean, Minianthes trifoliata, and which is on the bottom right, lower right. It's a very interesting plant. It grows in these really, really wet spots, oftentimes in water, in standing water. Has a beautiful white flower when it is flowering. And so the larvae actually of this particular moth will feed inside the plant stems. And this is where it hangs out. Like most Papapemas, they are plant stem borers or root borers. And so this particular individual, this particular species was found feeding on that. So now that we know what it's feeding on, we could actually focus on doing our black lighting, which you'll see in the next slide here. This is a typical black light setup. We take a sheet out in there in the field, and we put a light, and we run it off the generator, and we collect moths that come into the sheets. And here you can see the bog bean in the foreground with a light sheet in the background. And this was a particular site that was, we did get a specimen here. Eric Branch actually was a colleague here, and he found this particular individual at this site. Logan and I had to come back for a meeting. We were bummed because we were working with him the night before and we didn't see it. He then sent us a text or a photo, and we looked at it and we're like, oh my gosh, he picked it up. So we were super excited about it. So of course, being the competitor that I am, a few days later, I hooked it back up to the UP and set up at Shingleton Fen. And we found another location as well. And this was an interesting story to this site. We were traversing between sites. There were three of us in three different vehicles, and we were caravanning to the site, and we got stopped because the road had been closed in front of us. The county was working on fixing the culvert, replacing it. And so we were stopped by this beautiful wetland, and we're like, oh, we got to go check this out. So we got out, we walked through it, and sure enough, we found some of the host plant for this thing. And I knew that I'd have to go back at some point and blacklight there. And sure enough, we picked up one adult in about 2 hours of survey effort before a thunderstorm rolled in, and we had to shut down early. So we had 3 new locations for this moth in 2024. One of the final species I want to talk about is another really unique species. It's the Huron River leafhopper. This does not have a global rank, which means there's not enough information, they don't think, to actually rank it. However, it is a Michigan endemic, right? So it only occurs in Michigan, and we rank it as an S1. It's found from 6 sites, all in Oakland County. Those are associated with prairie fens down there. And we have 1 site in the UP that's found in the Hiawatha National Forest. And all of the sites that this particular leafhopper is known from has its host plant, which is Matt Muley, Muhlenbergia richardsonus. This is the only plant that it can feed on, and so it's really restricted to it. And quite a range extension for this one. You can see from the photo out in the middle of this particular northern fen, the little rivulets that run through here, this particular place. When you get about a half mile out into this fen, you run into this, and it's just a complete and dominant understory of muley grass. It's pretty fascinating. It's found here. There's only a few places, maybe, I don't know, 2 or 3 places in the UP that actually has Matt muley. So we're hoping to find it in a few more spots in future years. So just to recap, in 2024, 30 sites were visited, sometimes multiple times, for a total of 48 surveys. This included, again, surveys for spring butterflies and native bees, summer surveys for the rare dragonflies and leafhoppers, and late summer surveys, early fall surveys for rare moths. If you look at the overall distribution of the sites, we had really good coverage across the UP, stretching from east to west. And a total of 11 rare insect observations were recorded, with the most significant findings, again, including the 3 new rare moth locations for Papapima awimi, all of which, in fact, were actually new county records as well. So good stuff there. These are also, reading through these highlights, we also found new record for red disc alpine. We updated 2 free fiddler occurrences. Again, we reconfirmed the Huron River leafhopper at a site. Also updated an occurrence for Heinz emerald dragonfly at one of the locations. And we had 3 updated occurrences for the incurvate emerald. And again, 1 new occurrence for the yellow-banded bumblebee. So we think our first survey was pretty successful. We also had a little bit of disappointment in some of the early spring butterfly surveys. 2 of the 10 sites had Phrygia fritillary that we surveyed, and 0 of 20 sites for the Phrygia fritillary. So the verdict is still out. We're hoping that we were just off in our timing of surveys, and that we'll find them all over the place this next year. The other thing that was going on last year is we had a really, really dry May and June in the UP, so that may have impacted the flight times as well. So future plans for 2025 and 2026. This was a 3-year project that we have funding for. We're going to continue to revisit the Phrygia and Phrygia sites to see what's going on. And we're going to continue to do more native bee surveys in all 3 times of the season. We're going to continue with our rare dragonfly surveys. And of course, we're going to do more blacklighting surveys at new sites for the awimi borer. This is a site that we found in the Hiawatha National Forest after our surveys were completed. But you can just look at the large understory of bog buckbean at this site. Again, this is in the Hiawatha National Forest West Unit. And it's just amazing. There's probably at least an acre, if not 2 acres, of this dense mat of bog buckbean. So if we don't find it there, we will be really surprised. And I think that is it. I have one last slide, and maybe we have time for questions. Didn't take that long.
Thanks, Dave.
Yep.
We have one question in the Q&A, so if you have any other questions, feel free to drop them in there. And it looks like
Logan, yep,
Logan did answer it.
Oh, okay. All right.
Yep. Does Michigan have a lot of non-native bees? Are any of them considered invasive? And yes, there are a few non-native bee species in the state, with some examples that are considered invasive.
I'll let Logan handle that one.
Yep.
He did already?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, here's another one I see here. And it was, since the leafhopper was found in the UP, does this mean MNFI will be attempting to survey between Oakland County and the UP for more populations? And I will answer that this way. We will be surveying for that leafhopper only where Matt Muley is known from. So if you look at the distribution of that plant, which is also actually a state threatened species, I believe, there's a wide disjunct range for that species as well. So if we were to happen to find Matt Muley somewhere between here and the UP, we definitely would check it out for this particular species. Let's see, looks like there's another question here.
Yep, on bumblebees.
Yeah, I'll let Logan handle that one.
Okay, the question is there a certain type of bumblebee that would be more likely to forage, pollinate, That's a good question. Uh, I I don't know, honestly. In terms of the bumblebees, I mean, so bumblebees do vary in their tongue length, and that might dictate uh what they will forage from. Some bumblebees are short tongue, some bumblebees long tongue. So, I would expect in this case something with a longer tongue. Um, but I think that pollination would probably be more attributed to some of the smaller native bee species in this case. And I suspect it's probably not heavily visited by bumblebees. But I don't
Yeah,
know.
I don't know if I've ever seen any bumblebees visit them, to be honest.
Me
The
neither.
native bee that I was showing there is probably what, gathering pollen, or is it utilizing the oils in that? Do you know, Logan?
The um the
The native
Andrina that
bee,
you showed
yeah,
a few slides
yeah,
back.
yeah.
Yeah, it was probably pollen collecting in that photo. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, another bee that could visit this. This is kind of going down a rabbit hole, but the carpenter bees are known to tear little holes at the base of flowers to nectar rob. It's kind of what they call it, nectar steal. Um, so I could see that happening. But yeah, I suspect that um it for this species more likely to be visited by a smaller sweat bee sized native bee, not a bumblebee.
There is a question on what are ways to protect these insects? Is it just preservation of peatlands?
Yeah, well, certainly preservation is the start, right? So we certainly want to make sure that we protect them. We protect the hydrology. We also want to make sure we use pesticides wisely if we use them at all. Probably would prefer not to use them, but if you absolutely have to, you make sure you follow label directions and sorts of things like that. Um, Anything else you want to add along those lines, Logan?
Um, Not particularly. I would say that um, no, I don't have anything to add, Dave.
Yeah, all right,
So
cool.
Uh, Another question. Any hints for identifying Heinz emerald dragonfly habitat in the Great Lakes dunes?
So Heinz emerald dragonfly is more of a coastal fen or northern fen habitat, so it's in the wetland parts. Now there are some interdunal wetlands that they may actually forage in. I'm not don't think that they actually will lay eggs in those dune areas, but so yeah, there's no in those Great Lakes dunes. They may be utilized. The adults may be utilizing those as feeding grounds, but they certainly would not be using them for egg laying or larval habitat. That helps.
Yes, thank you. I don't see any other questions. So I will say thank you, Dave and Logan, for making it.
Absolutely.
This is a great presentation. Really enjoyed hearing about it. I look forward to hearing on how year 2 goes too. Um, and I think we'll say thank you to everyone for coming. Give you some time back in your day and hope you have a wonderful Monday.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
thanks.